you're not afraid to open up a little bit and just do what's true to you, people are craving that right now. They're craving all the characterization and stuff. That stuff's gone. It's disappearing like that.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Forbes Top Creator Show. I'm Forbes editor Steve Bertoni, here with a very special guest. He's a former Navy SEAL, a former CIA operative. He trained Keanu Reeves on John Wick and how to handling himself in battle, correct?
That's correct.
He's also an entrepreneur, a podcast host, and creator with more than 8 million followers across the board. Everybody, Shawn Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
It's pretty surreal to be here at Forbes, so.
What do you think?
I think it's awesome.
Well, we're psyched to have you here. We've had all types of creators. You're our first kind of Navy SEAL military-based creator. So.
Oh, really?
Yes,
well,
so it's very cool.
Hope to be one of many.
Yes, love it. I want to start with one of your most kind of significant pieces of content, and that is during the crazy run-up to the election in 2024, you scored a long-form interview with President Trump, or who was candidate Trump then. I want you to take me through that, first of all. I want to hear how it happened, how you booked it, how you planned for it. Like, let's start with that. Put me in the room when you found out this was happening.
Okay, so I wanted to interview everybody that was running for president, and so we got Vivek, we got RFK, and Trump was obviously on the agenda.
Yeah.
And so, I have a lot of friends that are in politics now and have made a lot of acquaintances through podcasting. And so I just started hitting everybody up. I hit my attorney up. I hit friends of mine in Congress up. I hit friends of mine that are senators up. And I kept getting really close. Hey, he's going to call you. Hey, they're going to call you. Hey, here's his number. Here. And I don't really know exactly what avenue wound up working, but
okay.
One day I got a text, and it was from his media team, and they said, hey, he wants to do the interview. It's going to be this date. They pushed it out like 3 weeks, and I was like, I don't care what the date is. I'll clear the schedule. And just let me know, when it is. Then that date wound up being in like 3 days. So
super fast.
Super fast. I don't have a full-time mobile team, so I had to call in some favors from a really good friend of mine who is a great videographer. Got him on board. He was like, absolutely, I'll be there. Packed the team up. We were in Vegas, I think the next day, and I didn't even have time to plan the interview. So, I mean, I'm pretty spun up on, a lot of the stuff that's important to me.
Yeah.
That's been going on, not just in the country, but in the world. I look more at a worldview. And so we got in there, day of the interview. They didn't even ask for the outline. They didn't care.
They didn't say like what kind of questions you're going to ask?
They didn't ask for an outline. The day of, I had breakfast with his media
Even
guy.
you, Shawn, when you came in on the show, your team asked me for the questions I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So Trump didn't even need that. Okay.
Yeah, no, he didn't. There was no. They didn't care.
Yeah.
And so walked into the interview. I wrote it out, hand wrote it out on a piece of paper. Just thought about the things that are, some of the stuff that's going on, geopolitics and some in-country stuff. And all right, how do I make all these topics flow into a good interview? And totally, it didn't go that way at all. But he actually wound up in the interview. I mean, super personal, by the way. I don't know if you met him.
I met Trump years before he was president. I met him I was doing a business story, and it was in Trump Tower, and the person I was interviewing was like, hey, let's go say hi to Donald. This was this is way before, this is probably 2012, right?
Yeah.
And just went into his office, and he has it was like the cleanest rug I've ever seen in Trump's. It was like a cream colored rug that like had the vacuum lines in it. Like no one had ever walked in it. And he had his office with all those magazine pictures. And yeah, he was hilarious. But then again, that was like Trump the Apprentice. That was way before there was any political stuff. Yeah.
So the one thing they were really particular about is the look. So I had my look that I wanted to do, and that went straight out the window. Pretty much just like the flow of the interview.
In terms
But,
of look, you mean like what the
like
stage
how I
look-
wanted the aesthetics to look on
Okay.
camera.
What did you want to do?
I just wanted, I mean, it wasn't too different, but I wanted to, we had it all set up. It looked great, but they were like, we want it to look exactly like this. So they moved everything around. They set it up, told my guy how they wanted him to set it up. And then, but yeah, then I met him. He met all of my team. There were 3 or 4 NFL stars. I think Raiders in there.
Just hanging out?
Yep, flew right past him when he saw me and the team, and introduced himself immediately. Was very personable with my team as well. And then, yeah, we sat down, did the interview, and the questions that I had, he actually answered every question that I had on the list, just in a roundabout way.
Yes.
He does a big circle around when you ask him a question, and in that big circle, he would answer 3 or 4 of the other questions that I had. So
It was funny. I was rewatching the episode today before our interview, and as a journalist and as a host, like I was trying to think like, okay, if I was in your shoes, what I would have done, because he's like he's all over the place, not like he just kind of riffs, and you ask a question and it could be a 7-minute answer. But what was it like? Kind of like you're sitting across from this powerful person, this famous person, and how did you decide the questions you were going to ask? Because obviously you have your audience, you have your angle. Like, what was interesting to you, or did you have a certain things you want to ask?
Every interview I do, I'm only feeding my own curiosity, and so I try not to think about what the audience wants or what the country wants to hear, and I don't listen to anybody else's interviews because I don't want to. I just want to feed my own curiosity and talk about things that are extremely important to me. And he is a really tough interview, to wrangle in. But there was one thing that was really important to me, that I wanted to bring out, and that was the fact that we were sending $40 to $87 million a week to the Taliban in cash. And I didn't know if he had known that. I didn't know if a lot of people knew that yet. And so that's
in what way? Where was this coming from?
Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
This is coming from various NGOs that Taliban have set up within Afghanistan once they took control of the country. They are supposed to be for rebuilding Afghanistan. But since Taliban has taken over, there's been, and this information's a year old now, but there's been over 900 new NGOs that have been set up within Afghanistan that are just feeding the Taliban, and the Taliban is controlled by Hamza bin Laden. It's this big new web that's been created since we
Where'd you get
left
this?
the
Where'd you
withdrawal.
get this? Is this been published? Where'd you get this intel from?
This intel is from a former CIA targeter.
Okay. What does a targeter do?
Oh, what does a targeter do? A targeter basically tracks bad guys, sets up the targeting package, and kind of initiates the hit.
So
If that-
literally targeting, yes.
Yes. So she targets the head honchos
Wow.
of organizations.
So you want to make sure you questioned Trump on that, and what was his response?
His response was he didn't know, I don't think. And I wanted to hold some people accountable too, so I dropped their names in the interview, and magically, the very next day after the interview released, we got a response out of that person's office, like immediately.
Wow.
And got passed through the House. Now it's sitting in the Senate. So it worked. Made a lot of waves.
Oh, so you put out a show that is actually having consequence
Yes.
in the DoD and everything. It's wild. What were you before you've had a crazy career, super high pressure. Were you nervous before this interview?
Yes, I was nervous. I didn't know how it was going to go, but once I met him and once I sat down, I mean, it goes away.
Mm-hmm.
So I was nervous because I just, that was the biggest interview I'd done.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to mess it up, but I think it went great, and the other thing that I wanted to bring up is the abortion stuff. I just wanted to hear his take on that directly from his mouth and not from legacy media sources. And so I thought, and like I said, everything else that was in my outline was answered. It was accomplished.
Okay, very cool. And what was the? I always want to hear this video was viewed more than 4 million times. It got 20,000 plus comments. What was the reaction? What was the reaction like? Because I remember we were talking before. I did a cover story on Jared Kushner, right during 2016. It was before Trump had taken office. It was before Jared had actually joined the White House, and it was a business cover story on basically how Kushner helped Trump win that election, and it was a business story, but I got attacked on both sides just through back then it was Twitter, the Twitter sphere, people calling me a communist, people calling me a fascist. It was amazing. Just like, that's how I knew I got it right, when both sides were hitting you. Yeah. And I'm thinking this was a business story where I interviewed key people in the Democratic Party, key people in the Republican Party, a step-by-step on almost like how the technology was used, social media was used to win that election. And I got hammered on both sides. I can't imagine their feedback with you when you actually sat down with the candidate when it was such a tumultuous time. Like, what was that response like?
Very similar to what you're saying. It was a big decision too. It was a big decision. It was leading up. I was like, do I want to do this? Do I not? Do I really want to step into this arena and get this heavy into politics, or do I not? And so, but like I said, I wanted to interview all of the candidates. Mm-hmm. We got close to interviewing Harris.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, I'll tell you. So,
yeah. Well, let's focus on the response first. But
the response was, the response was, oh, now you're solely a MAGA guy. There was a lot of hate. There was a lot of hate on the fact that I didn't ask that many questions. But like I said, I didn't need to wrangle him other than the Afghanistan piece, because we weren't going to go there.
Yeah.
But everything else in my outline was answered. All the Ukraine stuff, all the energy stuff, everything was in there. So there was a little bit of that. There was, you're a Trump shill, you're this, you're that. Then there was the other crowd that was super ecstatic. I mean, we were the second podcast to interview him.
Wow, yeah.
So Theo Vaughn's released, I believe, the day we arrived in Vegas, which I was like, oh man, we're not the first. But
that's good. You can ride the wave. Sometimes that's good.
But it was awesome. And I think what really came out of that just is a big win for podcasting overall, is that, I think that from now on, these candidates are going to be forced to do long form podcast interviews that aren't the typical 3 to 5 minute news segment or 5-second soundbite. I mean, it's taken over, and you see that happening.
I feel like every election has had a new strategy and technology in the last couple elections. I'm sure it was the same playbook from the 1900s all the way up to maybe Obama's first campaign. But then remember, Obama started kind of the grassroots, the Twitter sort of thing, and then Trump the first time with that's power of targeting and Facebook and all that sort of thing. And then this was the podcast election. Mm-hmm. And really interesting, different strategies from both sides. But what do you think, like, going forward, like, what is the power of podcasting? Why must all these candidates be going on shows like yours?
Well, I mean, if your opponent does a podcast, then, they've opened up. They get to see a window into who you actually are, how you think, how fast you think, what your views are. I mean, maybe even where you grew up. I mean, with a lot of these guys, with RFK, with Vivek, when I interviewed them, there was a backstory there. There was how they grew up. I mean, RFK talked about overcoming his addictions with heroin and all that stuff. And so you kind of learn, what their values are, what they're about, what they believe in, and they have time to articulate it more. And it's hard to, it's hard to hide stuff from the public when you're in that type of an interview environment.
Yeah.
And so,
but at the same time,
if your opponent does it and you don't, I think that people will see that as you're hiding something. I think they'll see it as a weakness.
No, and it's fascinating where too, you also have you have long form, you have to answer those questions, but it also in some ways opens up the candidate, I think, and people get to know them more as a person versus, when you and I were kids, the big thing would be like, if the candidate gets on 60 Minutes, then the whole world sees. But then that's really tough interviews. It can be cut and edited in different ways. But the powerful thing with a podcast, good or bad, is that they're usually unedited and the person has their chance to tell their story without worrying about, being edited. So it looks, nothing's taken out of context,
Yeah.
which is good and bad, I think. Tell me about Harris. What was that attempt?
So Harris, I've tried really hard to get her, and then I had somebody that was really high up in her campaign reach out to me, said she was very interested in my podcast. I said, hey, look, this is open. I have no agenda other than to give her a platform. And they said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, I'd love to talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal. They said, we don't want to do that. I said, okay, how about national security? They said, well, I think that would be great. She hasn't talked much about that. What do you think you disagree with her on the most? And so I brought some things up, and then they kind of kept bringing up different topics, and I just got to the point. I said, look, I don't care what we talk about. I said, how about you give me the outline, and we'll just talk about whatever that is. I don't care. Like I know enough about everything that's going on that I can handle myself in an interview. So you make it you make it what you want, and I'll do the interview, and I'll go by those guidelines. And so they said that she wanted to do it. They said she had watched 3 of my shows.
Yep.
She liked the way I interviewed, and then it just kind of fell off the map. We did Newsweek did a piece on it. I think the Washington Post did a piece on it to try to get her attention again, and then it was Brett Baer did an interview, and after that, that's kind of when it fell off.
Yeah.
And we did get one more contact from her team, and they said, hey, if she gets in, she'll do the interview, but we're not doing anything else.
Well,
So
what's your prediction, whether it's the next president in 4 years from now, or maybe the midterms in 2 years? What is going to be the playbook for all the politicians in terms of podcasts and social media?
I think they're going to hit the podcast. I mean, I think they know that they have to at this point, and so I think podcasts will be at the tip of that spear.
And it's interesting too that this year, this time around, it wasn't just people going on political podcasts. I think Trump did a very interesting job about picking non-political podcasts to kind of reach communities.
Yeah.
Like if you were, this is not a political question, this is a media question for you. If you were the head of social media for a presidential candidate right now, what would be like your playbook in terms of social media, in terms of connecting with the electorate?
For podcasts or just for anything?
Anything.
I would be on every single platform there is. I would do what he did. I would try to get in front of every audience that I possibly could, and to deliver whatever my message was to as many people as possible. I think the days, I mean, you just can't do you're never going to reach anybody if you just go to Fox News or MSNBC. I mean, those people are seated and they know what they want. They're not going to deviate from it. And so you're just hitting an echo chamber when you hit those news stations, in my opinion. And so you have to hit every audience so that they can hear it from the horse's mouth, and that it actually gets to them through the algorithm.
What about, I want some advice. I know you've had, you've stated you have some distrust of mainstream media. Forbes is obviously mainstream traditional media. And there's a rise of podcasts. It's fascinating for me because we do it and it's what I cover, but it's also scary for, I think, mainstream media. What would be your advice if you were running Forbes or a Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN? Like, what do we need to do to kind of, is it separate roles? Is it a yes and yes? Or are there things that traditional media must do to learn from what you guys are doing?
I mean, I think it's separate roles, but I think look, for legacy media, I think people are very forgiving. And so if things were put out that weren't necessarily true, or specific narratives were put out that wound up not being true, or whatever you think that people are distrusting you for. I think the best thing to do is to acknowledge the mistakes, say that you're going to correct them, and then correct them. Because I see legacy media stations starting to move towards podcasts. Maybe it'll work, or maybe not podcasts, but long form interviews.
Yeah.
And maybe that will work. Maybe it won't. But I mean, I not everybody has an hour, or in my case, 4 or 5 hours to listen to an interview. And
you
so
go long. You go real long.
We go deep. When I do a live story, we go deep. but so I think that the quick news hits, they have a place, but it has to be something that people can trust, because it's a way to condense down what I do into a 5-minute segment, and you're up to speed, and if you want a certain subject, then you go to the podcast to get more into the weeds about it. So I think that owning mistakes, rectifying those mistakes, and just being honest with the audience goes a hell of a lot farther than people give it credit for. I've made those mistakes.
Yeah.
I've made those mistakes. I did that with the hurricane relief package. I put out a segment, a guest of mine put out a segment that was totally false about Kamala Harris. I ran with it. And when I found out that segment was false, I immediately made a video, came out, said, this is false. That's not what I'm about. I'm not about putting out false content. I don't care. Like, this is what actually happened. I need to rectify this immediately. That got like twice the amount of views than the actual segment did. And people appreciated it.
Yeah.
They're like, this is what needs to happen. This is ownership of this is what everybody should be doing. We made a mistake. Yeah. Let's correct it.
In terms of roles, like, what is the role of a traditional branded media, and what is the role of a podcaster or alternative media? It sounds like they can play in the same box. What do you see those roles as?
I mean, I can't speak for all podcasters, but for me, I mean, I'm more in the weeds. I want to find out who the person is. And I'm not just in news. This kind of news just kind of fell on my lap.
Yeah.
But I'm more of a life story guy, and I want to dig into, struggles of veterans, and I want to interview ultra successful people, especially that built something from nothing, and talk about that arc in their life. That's something that mainstream they just don't have the time to be able to do that.
You'd be great at Forbes. That's what we do. We tell the crazy stories.
You guys are awesome, man.
I want to get back into your story, but I have to ask, what was the one question you wish you could have asked Trump if you didn't? And what would be the one question you wish you could ask Kamala if she had gone on the podcast?
Man, I got to be honest. I got everything I wanted out of Trump. I got. So there's nothing there off the top of my head. The one thing I would have really liked to have asked Kamala is I would have liked to asked her about the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Just hear her story, hear her side of it.
Yes.
Cool. I want to go to your story, because you started Navy SEAL, CIA, secret, literally under the radar, and now you moved into media, news, interviews, 8 million followers, the exact opposite of special forces, secret missions. Tell me how you built your podcast and built your brand, because it sounds like, and you also built a company. It sounds like the podcast was not an accident, but not kind of what the original aim was.
Yeah, definitely wasn't.
Yeah, tell me the story.
So when I quit contracting for CIA, I started this tactics company, and I was teaching people.
By the way,
self-defense.
I'm sure it's the CIA, so you can't talk. But when you say contracting for the CIA, are these kind of, you're doing like military missions for them? Because this is a whole world I don't know about.
Yeah, kind of. I was in this section called the Global Response Staff, and so have you ever seen the movie 13 Hours?
Yes. Yeah.
So those are my guys.
Okay.
And that's what I did. So kind of how it was it was the unit kind of started as personal protection for operatives.
Okay.
And then, but the requirements were really high to get in there. And so you would get all these guys from SEAL teams, from development group, from Delta, from Marine Raiders, and all of the top special ops units in the country. And what they began to see is they saw all these capabilities that they didn't have before from other mission sets that we were doing when we were in the military. And then it kind of just was like, well, what else could you guys do?
Mm.
Can you do this? What else can you guys do? Could we try that? And
so you guys are like Swiss Army knives. You could do all
yeah,
this stuff.
and so it really started growing into all these other aspects. And I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Okay.
And so when I left, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I left pretty abruptly, and so I started a tactics company because I was like, well, I gotta make money somehow. So I started teaching self-defense, some shooting courses. That took off really fast. That's when I trained Keanu Reeves for John Wick 3.
Yeah, you got to tell me that story. Because Keanu seems like he's like, you hear him interviewed, he's like super chill and very zen, and then he's doing this like crazy, from the Matrix to John Wick, very violent. Yeah.
No kidding, one of the best. So how it happened was I'd went out to shoot some content with this guy out in Southern California, and he had this woman come out who was trying out for the new Call of Duty game. And he's like, hey, could you train this woman for the new Call of Duty? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And so she comes out, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? I'm Shawn. Heard you're trying out. That's cool. Go grab an AR. Go grab a rifle. Let's get going. She's like, well, I've never held a rifle before. And I'm like, you want me to teach you how to clear a room and you've never held a rifle before? She's like, yeah. I was like, all right, how much time do we have? She's like, well, the tryout's in 2 hours, and the trial place is an hour away. So I said, all right,
Speed crash course.
this is how you hold it. Don't worry about the trigger, any of these controls. This is how you hold it. I'm just going to teach you how to cross through a doorway, get into a room, and you're going to look like a pro.
Okay.
And anything after that, you're not going to learn. So I worked with her for an hour, just crossing the doorway, punching her rifle out, and she got looking like very professional. Goes to the tryout, makes it. The guy tells me the next day, hey, she got the part. And I'm like, she got the part? And then not only did she get the part, they all wanted to know, all the stunt coordinators, like, where did you learn that? We've never seen anybody come here and clear a room like that before. We want to know who that was.
You might have to teach me this after we film this. We'll just
so
I'll grab a tripod. We can pretend it's a rifle.
Easy day. And so then he goes, hey, I want you to train my movie star Keanu for John Wick 3. Would you have a problem for that? I said, no. Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good to me.
So he comes out. I don't really get starstruck, and I'm not into that. And so he comes out, and he's super chill. I still remember he's like, oh, it's a beautiful day out here, and I was like, that's great. There's your rifle. Let's go. We got work to do. And he was like really into it. Like wanted to know every move I was making, why I was doing certain things, and his questions were very on point, very direct. I mean, he was really into it. Then he left, and his stunt guy called up and was like, "Hey, who just trained my movie star? I want to meet him." So he came out and met me. And
that's pretty good because this is John Wick 3. It's not John Wick 1. He's already been trained, and you just made that difference. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's how it went. And then I left tactics. That like created a lot of controversy within the whatever you want to call it, that community. And it's a very egocentric community. I was like, I don't need this anymore. And so I just started trying all these other things because I didn't want to be in that world. Plus I'd done it for 14 years for real. And so I started doing these survival series. I did where I'd bring people in and run them through a scenario. And in podcasting, I was getting big. And so I looked at what everybody was doing, with podcasting. A lot of people were doing the Joe Rogan setup, and I
Yeah.
said, we're not doing any of that. We're going to make this unique. I'm going to make it different. So I taught myself how to film. I taught myself how to edit. I taught myself how to do sound. I taught myself how to cut previews.
How'd you learn it all? YouTube?
I had my film crew that I brought out with me to California for the John Wick thing.
Yeah.
We had filmed a bunch of like mini 5-minute videos.
Wasn't you call Keanu? You say, listen, I taught you
Yeah.
how to, I taught you how to clear a room. Now you got to
Yeah.
teach me how to film a room, and we'll just call it,
Yeah.
quid pro quo.
So, and I had moved to Tennessee, and I just couldn't afford a film crew anymore. So I said, hey guys, this is going to be the last one. Why don't you come out? We'll film some.
And you were filming, so like you were filming survival videos?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
so
putting them, where were they living? On YouTube?
on YouTube.
Okay.
There's only 2 of them. They're still up there, I'm sure. But so I hired my film crew. Said, hey, I'm going to hire you for 1 day. We're going to shoot content as usual, but I just want you to. I was like, give me the cheapest camera I can get and still make it look good. Give me the cheapest microphones, cheapest everything. I just want to learn basically the fundamentals of this. Teach me how to edit a little bit, and then that'll be it.
Okay.
And so they came out, they taught me. I started working with it. Then it was YouTube University after that. Taught my wife how to film a little bit. And then we filmed our first podcast Christmas of 2019 with these cameras that had 30-minute timers. My wife was running back and forth, resetting the cameras so that we wouldn't. And then I put it all together. Nobody was doing previews, so I cut a preview. Everybody had equipment in the shots, microphones, headphones, muffs, all that stuff. I didn't want any of that in the shot. I made a super relaxed environment, so because I knew I wanted to peel the onion back. And we had my first guest on. We released it Christmas of 2019. We were in the top 100 the very next day.
Who was your first guest?
It was this guy, Mike Glover, who I worked with, contracted with at CIA. He was a former Green Beret.
The beautiful thing about podcasting and social media is, like you said, it's relatively easy and cheap to produce. The bad news is it's relatively easy and cheap to produce. There's so much out there. There's so much great content. There's so much noise. How did that first show, you think, broke the top 100? What was it? Were you on a special platform, or just hit with the like?
I think it was just authenticity. So, when I brought him in, I'd get, once again, I looked at everything and I was like, we have to do the opposite of what everybody's doing. Everybody's trying to do the Joe Rogan concept because it was so successful.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the pioneer. He's the king of podcasting. I said, we're not doing that. We're going to make something totally different. When I say we, I mean me and my
You
wife.
and your wife. And what was different? So, like, obviously, Rogan, they're around the table. They got the headphones on, very casual.
Yeah.
What did you say specifically? What was your version of different than that?
So, like I said, it was really good camera aesthetics. We put in a moving shot. I made a super relaxed studio, so you can kind of melt back in those chairs.
Your studio's cool. It's like the ultimate man cave. You got the
Yeah.
nice bar in the back. The lighting is very, very chill.
It started in my attic though,
Okay.
and so I just wanted to make an environment that was super relaxed, and so that's what I did. And I knew I wanted to go deep, I wanted to get inside the brain and talk about not only the career in combat, but veteran. Everybody knows about the veteran suicide epidemic, and a lot of these guys in legacy media wasn't documenting war, how it happened. It was the same talking heads over and over and over again documenting the war. And so through my career, I brought in all the people that were actually there on the ground doing the job, and so we documented that. Talked about.
So you're doing a lot of military, a lot of veteran, okay.
And I mean, we talk about suicide attempts, drug addictions, infidelity, all that stuff, and then how they got out of it and elevate their business. And so when it's all done, you have, I mean, any one of these could be turned into a motion picture. I mean, you have all the arcs. The audience, they go through the high, the lows with them. They cry. The guests cry. I mean, and then by the end of it, they're so attached to the guests that they just want to support them because they just spilled their whole life, all the good, all the bad, right there. And longest interview I've ever done is 9 hours.
9 hours.
9 hours. It was I think 30-year Delta career Delta, and then another 20 something at CIA, and involved in all kinds of stuff. But anyways,
Did you air the whole 9 hours?
what's that?
Did you air the full 9 hours?
Yeah, we split it into two.
Wow.
We split it into two. But yeah, and so that's how it started.
When did this become, you realize like, okay, this is going to be a new business, a new career?
Well, I never really realized it, and I just decided to go all in.
Okay.
Like I said, I was so tired of doing the tactical stuff, and I saw the first one cooked off. I was like, let's try it again. Second one cooked off. Third one, we started getting into some corruption stuff, and that cooked off. By four of them, I was like, I think we should hire a sound guy, and so we basically volunteered. I mean, and then when we got pregnant with my first son, or my son, then I got kicked out of the attic by my wife, and so we had to go.
Landlord threw you right out.
Yep.
Yeah.
So got a space. Now we have overhead, and I had to make it work. So we started looking around for advertising, and couldn't find any. So I developed these gummy bears, and that was kind of what. And Patreon, our subscription network, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Wait, what do you mean you developed gummy bears? Tell me about this.
Yeah, so I was gonna do this. I was gonna do CBD branded gummy bears because I've always struggled with sleep. And then this marketing guy was like, "Hey, you're gonna get sued catering to kids." And I said, "This is ridiculous. Fine, we'll just do gummy bear candy. I love gummy bears." And it just exploded.
What makes your gummy bears different than other gummy bears?
They're made in the U.S. I should have brought you some.
What are they called?
Vigilance Elite gummy bears.
All right.
But yeah, and so then I started broadening. I just started broadening the podcast and into different subject matters and into what it is today. And now I talk about whatever I want. Nobody dictates what I talk about, who I talk to, any of that. It's only if I have to be interested in it. If I'm not interested in it, then I'm not doing it.
You have really eclectic guests. It's fascinating, from military, politicians, business leaders. I haven't watched it yet, but I saw that you had a military psychic. Didn't know that existed on the show. How do you come up with your ideas for guests, and how do you reach out?
I mean, I don't watch much, but I do watch documentaries. So I go to the magazine aisle and I pick up National Geographic. A lot of that stuff interests me, and so I start going after subjects, and then I research what. All right, who's the expert in this subject, and then we go after them, or if there's somebody that's super interesting to me, then we'll try to get in touch and go after them. Or if there's a company that I'm really interested in, like Palantir, we'll go after Joe Lonsdale.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I do it.
What is your biggest source of income these days? You mentioned the gummy bears. You've mentioned the advertising. What's like your biggest revenue driver right now?
Biggest revenue driver is advertising.
Is that like pure AdSense, or is it brand sponsor
both?
Deals? Okay.
Both. And Patreon, our subscription network, is a huge leg. So
how does that work? I mean, I know Patreon as I know what it does. Mm-hmm. How do you use it? Because you already have all the YouTube followers. What do you differentiate on Patreon versus what you put out for free?
So we've turned Patreon into more of a community.
Okay.
And they get access to me. We'll do a live Zoom call at the end of each month. They get to ask the guests questions. They get to see. There's a pre-interview before the big one that we release that they get access, and only they get access to. I put my whole tactics library on there from before I was a podcaster. So we do lots of things on there. It's also kind of somewhat of a support network. And so they basically they get access to me and each other and my team, and we've turned it into a pretty damn good community.
That's very cool. I think I've been in touch with Patreon with having their CEO on. I would love to hear about his side and how it all works, which is good. Because we've done stuff on OnlyFans, but it's usually not your kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
different kind of content. But it is always interesting when there's non-adult stuff on these platforms. It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
You mentioned that some of these stories could be their own movies, their own motion pictures. Have you thought about branching off or expanding beyond your show into other forms of media, other businesses, other brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be 100% honest with you, at the very beginning of this, I really wanted Netflix to do a deal with me because the interviews were so in depth. I mean, you've seen some of them, but
Yep.
I just talked about the arc, and they're so well produced that I was just and basically my inspiration come from David Letterman's my next guest.
Okay.
I really liked those camera aesthetics. I liked there was no equipment, and I just really liked the way that looked. And so
Super slick, super thought out, elegant. Yeah.
so I turned that into my own version and took what I liked from that and made the Shawn Ryan show. But I remembered Netflix had this suggestion box, and so I would post the link in under my YouTube videos and say, hey, if you would like to see this as a Netflix special, then put in a suggestion, and I would track this.
Okay.
And it would get thousands and thousands and thousands of requests having us on there. But I never heard anything, and then as the podcast grew and I could grow my team, then it turned into what it is today, which is 3 a week instead of nine in a year and a half. I think was
You do 3 shows a week.
we do 3 shows a week.
Wow, crazy.
Sometimes 4.
Well, if Netflix, if you're watching, you have an offer out there, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, so is it you do 3 a week and everyone comes out to you?
For the most part, the one thing that I made an exception for Trump, I made an exception for Vance. And the thing that I really want to get into this year is going after foreign dignitaries to get. I'm really interested in geopolitics, and so we'll leave the country for a foreign president or a foreign prime minister.
Who's your dream interview that you haven't had yet?
J.K. Rowling's.
Tell me why.
I think it's this. I mean, she wrote Harry Potter in the back of a station wagon as a single mom. That's pretty. I think that's very inspiring for women, and I think that's very inspiring for everybody. From where she came from to where she is today.
Now she's one of our Forbes billionaires.
Yeah,
she won't talk to us, but she's one of our Forbes.
Oh, really? I don't think she talks to anybody. We haven't been able to get in touch either.
Are you a big Harry Potter fan?
Yeah.
How about kind of foreign leader wise, or just any leader wise?
Well, I don't want to give too much away.
Okay.
We got a lot of good things that are coming down the pipe that are this close to being done, or happening. But we just did a really good one with this guy that's running for president of Romania. His name's Călin Georgescu. It's very interesting what's going on over there, and that was in last year we did one with Ahmad Massoud, who is the commander of the Afghan resistance.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's heavy, important stuff for sure.
It is.
Real quick, what do you think about it's all about everything is in media and social media is becoming tribal and very kind of, very combative. And you mentioned, obviously, you tried to have all the candidates on your show. Where do you think we're going with this in terms of of combativeness in media? You think it's going to get more separated, more together? What's your view of this?
I mean, we're talking about politics for the most part, correct?
Yeah.
I think that the answer to that lies within the politicians, because they have to be I had an open invitation, you know what I mean? And they didn't take it. And that paints me in a picture where it's like, oh, he'll only have this, this party. And so, but I'm open to everybody. And I know a lot of other people are open to everybody too. I mean, Joe Rogan was open to everybody. I think Theo Vaughn was open to everybody. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but I think there were a lot of people that were trying to get both sides here, and both sides didn't want to play ball. And so, but I think that's changing, and I think we're kind of forcing the change because people aren't going to get elected if they don't come on podcasts. So
I think that's changed. Even I remember there was an interview with Bernie Sanders on the New York Times saying that he would do everybody if he could.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Joe Rogan is so painted right now with Trump, but the last election he endorsed Bernie Sanders, which is just very interesting, how fluid everything is. But like you said, I think everyone is going to be everywhere they can.
Yeah,
going forward. Right, Shawn, we already manifested your Netflix specials coming out. We're going to make that happen. What else? It's February 2025. It already feels like 2025 should be over already. There's been so much craziness, so much news. What do you have planned for this year? What's coming up? What are you excited about?
I mean, I'm excited about, one thing I'm excited about is the foreign dignitary interviews. But the other thing I'm excited about is throughout this interview, I've told you how independent we are, and we've maintained that. And so one thing that I want to do is I'm going to bring all of my advertising in-house as well, so that we're 100% independent. We're out of our contract coming this fall, and plan on bringing everything in-house. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Speaking of in-house, you said you learned how to shoot, do audio, everything yourself. Are you still, you and your wife, kind of like a dynamic duo, or have you brought in other people? Do you have production? Do you have a sales team? Like, how does that work?
We've brought in other people. The only thing we don't have right now is a sales team, and we're putting that together right now so that when we exit our current contract, that we have everything in place. So yeah, my wife is she's a stay-at-home mom with the kids now.
Wonderful. What do you, by being independent, by putting it all in one spot under your roof, what are the advantages of that?
I think the advantages are one advantage is you're just a free agent to work with whoever you want to work with. You can target whoever you want to target, and if a massive opportunity comes available, like Spotify or Netflix or who knows what's coming down the pipe, then you're able to move into that immediately instead of work through contractual agreements.
Well, if you were going to start, what advice would you have for someone who wants to start a podcast or a show right now? Give me some advice for them, kind of content-wise, and one piece of advice business-wise for them.
Content-wise, I would say just be it sounds cheesy. Be yourself. Be authentic.
You can't be authentic. You can't say I'm banning the word authentic from the show.
Why is that?
Because everyone says it and it means nothing. So tell me more.
It means nothing?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's like leadership. It's hard. It's easy to say, hard to define.
So look, you asked how I became successful.
Yeah.
I was me. I did what I wanted to do. I didn't look at what everybody else. Here's where everybody messes up. They become a character. They see somebody else that they look up to, or they want what somebody else has, and then they create their whole image around that, and then you're stuck in that character forever.
Yeah.
And eventually everybody figures out that you're just a character. That's not actually you, and you're going to grow out of that spot in your life, but you're going to trap yourself. And so my advice would be yourself, just be you, and if you can do that, and you're not afraid to open up a little bit and just do what's true to you, people are craving that right now. They're craving all the characterization and stuff. That stuff's gone. It's disappearing like that.
That was so much better than authentic. Thank you. So you actually drilled it down. That's really good. How about business-wise? What would be the one thing you wish you would give someone advice about if they're starting a new podcast? Obviously, they gotta.
If you're starting a new podcast, learn how to do everything. Learn how to edit. Learn how to film. Don't overdo it at the beginning. Know every aspect of your business. People are going to come in. People are going to leave. You're going to have to fire people, and you're going to have to fill all of those gaps in the meantime until you start making the revenue that you need. That where you can build a real team. And so learn every aspect of the business, at least the fundamentals.
Well, that's wonderful answers. I really appreciate it. You really drilled down. So much better than authentic. I love it. I want to thank Shawn Ryan, the host and founder of the Shawn Ryan Show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.